The Miller house in Portland, Maine had always seemed to me like something out of a novel, an old treasure preserved in brick and wood, standing stubbornly against time. Its tall windows caught the morning light in a way that made the glass glow like polished amber, while the faded red bricks seemed to carry with them the breath of generations. Every corner of that house hummed with memory. The walls, though cracked here and there, whispered of dinners long finished, of conversations long ended. The wooden staircase creaked in that familiar, almost musical rhythm each time someone ascended, as though the very boards had grown used to carrying the weight of countless footsteps across the decades. To outsiders, those imperfections were signs of age. To me, they were the soul of the place. They were a language only I seemed to understand, a language of echoes and ghosts, of comfort and warning all at once. That morning, I paused at the kitchen counter, my hand resting lightly on the cool marble surface, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards above me. Some mornings, those sounds reassured me, reminding me of the life still breathing within the house. Other mornings, like this one, they unsettled me. There was something in them, an unevenness, a hesitation that made the air feel thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath. "Mommy, look, the clouds are making animals." Sophie's voice rang from the living room, pulling me out of my thoughts. My 6-year-old stood by the wide front window, her small hands pressed against the glass as if she might reach into the sky itself and shape the clouds into her own creations. Her imagination was boundless, a never-ending stream that spilled into every hour of the day. I smiled at her enthusiasm. Every morning brought her some new adventure, pirate ships sailing in the clouds, secret castles hidden in tree branches, or talking rabbits darting between the shadows of our garden. That ability to turn the ordinary into the magical was a gift. Sometimes I feared she had inherited too much of me. My tendency to see more than was there, to hear voices in silence, to search for meaning in things other people overlooked. I poured orange juice into a glass and called her back to the table. Breakfast, as always, had the appearance of normalcy. Toast cooling on plates, butter melting unevenly, coffee steaming in my favorite chipped mug. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. I could feel it, though I couldn't name it yet. The sound of Daniel's footsteps on the stairs broke the quiet. My husband descended with his usual polished composure, every hair in place, his shirt crisp as though he had just stepped out of an advertisement. He was 40 now, still tall, still handsome, still the man whose charm could turn heads at work functions or neighborhood gatherings. His smile, magnetic as ever, seemed to stretch wide enough to hold the world, and yet, I had grown to recognize the moments when that smile didn't quite reach his eyes. This morning was one of those moments. "I have an important meeting this weekend," he announced casually, as he ruffled Sophie's hair. "If it goes well, it could change everything for us. Daddy will bring you a special gift. I promise." Sophie's eyes lit up, her innocence catching the promise like a firefly in a jar. I stayed silent, but inside unease stirred. There was something in his tone, too careful, too rehearsed, that made me hesitate. Daniel had been different these past few months. It began soon after my mother passed away. Grief had barely settled in my chest, sharp and raw, when her will was read, and I learned she had left me a sizable inheritance. Money that was supposed to ease the ache of her loss had instead sharpened the air around my marriage. Daniel's restlessness had grown, like a man carrying an itch he couldn't scratch. His phone calls lengthened, his smiles shortened, his absences piled up in ways I could not ignore. As if that weren't enough, Evelyn, my mother-in-law, had inserted herself more often into our days. She had a talent for calling unannounced, her voice dripping with the kind of elegance that made everyone else believe she was gracious. I knew better. She never saw me as worthy of Daniel. To her, I was an artist who played with canvases, instead of someone who built a proper future. With Sophie, her affection was just as conditional. She adored her granddaughter, yes, but only when Sophie acted like the miniature adult Evelyn wished she would be. Laughter, wild games, muddy shoes, all the marks of childhood. Evelyn disapproved of them as though joy itself were improper. That morning, all of those unspoken tensions wove themselves into the air. I tried to drown them out by focusing on Sophie's laughter, on the bright sound of her giggles, as she made up stories about animals in the sky. But beneath it all, a heaviness clung to me. There were shadows in my home I couldn't yet name, and they seemed to follow me from room to room. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family, the charming husband, the devoted wife, the imaginative child. But inside the Miller house, a quiet storm was gathering, and I could feel the pressure in my chest, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. In the days that followed, I buried myself in work. My upcoming exhibition at the Portland Art Museum consumed my hours. It was the project I had dreamed of for years, a tribute to forgotten female artists of the 20th century, women whose brushstrokes had been dismissed, whose canvases had been left in attics to gather dust. I poured myself into their stories, desperate to resurrect their names and place them where they belonged, in the light. I told myself that dedication would ground me, that art could be my anchor, while everything else shifted. And yet, in the quiet hours of the house, when Sophie had gone to bed, and Daniel disappeared behind closed doors with his phone pressed tightly to his ear, the shadows lingered. Sophie, ever curious, often wandered into my study while I worked. One afternoon, she came in with an old photograph clutched in her small hand, her eyes wide with discovery. "Mommy, is this Grandma?" she asked. The picture was faded, edges curling, but I recognized it instantly, myself as a child, standing beside my late mother. My chest tightened as though someone had wrapped a hand around it. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "That was Grandma when she was younger." Sophie nodded, but leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper, as if she were confessing something fragile. "Grandma talks to me sometimes. She says I should be careful." I tried to laugh it off, telling myself that children often blurred dreams with memories, that Sophie's imagination had always been vivid, but her words rooted themselves in me, growing heavier each day, and then came the evening when she quietly confessed again. "Mommy, I saw Daddy on the phone with Grandma Evelyn. They were whispering. Daddy said you wouldn't notice." I froze, my brush still in my hand, paint dripping unheeded onto the floor. Daniel was always taking work calls. Yes, and often in hushed tones. But something about the seriousness in Sophie's eyes made me pause. She wasn't inventing this. My daughter, with her innocent clarity, had seen something real. I smoothed her hair with my hand, and forced my voice to remain calm. "Sometimes adults keep secrets for work," I said gently. "But thank you for telling me, sweetheart." Inside, though, the shadows thickened. Sophie's warning, her whispered words, her watchful eyes, they all wrapped themselves around my heart, pulling it into a place I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Even as I reassured Sophie with my soft smile and calming words, a sharp splinter of doubt pushed deeper into my chest. The more I tried to dismiss her warnings as the colorful imagination of a child, the harder it became to silence the gnawing unease inside me. Children sometimes saw truths adults could not bear to name, and my daughter, my wide-eyed, perceptive Sophie, carried her observations with an eerie seriousness that unsettled me. That unease only deepened days later, late at night when I walked down the hallway past Daniel's study. He had told me earlier that he was exhausted and heading to bed early, leaving me alone with the muffled hum of the dishwasher and the silence of the house. But when I reached his study door, I noticed something that stopped me cold. It wasn't locked. Daniel always locked that door. Always. The sight of it slightly ajar filled me with the kind of dread that makes your skin prickle, as though the house itself was warning me not to enter. I pushed it open slowly. The air inside smelled faintly of leather and old paper, of the polished oak desk he prided himself on keeping immaculate. Files sat stacked with unsettling neatness, lined as if staged for an audience. But it wasn't the orderliness that drew my attention. It was the one drawer left open, the way it seemed to beckon me. My hand trembled as I reached inside and found a folder labeled in bold black letters. Life insurance. I shouldn't have looked. Part of me wanted to close it immediately and walk away, to retreat to bed and pretend ignorance. But something stronger urged me on, whispering that ignorance might very well be my undoing. I pulled the documents out, my eyes scanning the crisp pages, and then my breath caught. Just 1 week after my mother's funeral, when my grief had still been raw, when I could barely rise from bed in the mornings, Daniel had taken out a massive life insurance policy, not for himself, for me, the beneficiary, Daniel Miller, my husband. The air pressed down on me, thick and heavy. My pulse thundered in my ears, as though my own body were sounding an alarm. My hands shook so badly the papers rattled, and I had to press them flat against the desk to steady them. I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps this was simply precaution, I thought. Perhaps Daniel, in his practical, calculated way, was ensuring that Sophie would be cared for if tragedy struck. But the timing, God, the timing, chilled me to the bone. Why then? Why immediately after my inheritance? Why only in my name? I forced the documents back into the folder, slid it into the drawer, and pressed the wood closed with trembling hands. My throat felt dry, my body buzzing with restless panic. When I finally crept back into bed beside him, Daniel lay breathing evenly, his face turned toward the ceiling, lips parted in a perfect picture of peaceful sleep. I stared at him for what felt like hours, trying to decipher the man beside me, a stranger wrapped in the skin of my husband. The next morning, I was already on edge when Sophie wandered to the window again. Her little voice broke the stillness of the kitchen. "Mommy, I dreamed about the basement." My heart jolted. "What basement?" I asked cautiously, keeping my voice even. She looked at me with a seriousness that no 6-year-old should possess. "The one with a secret room. It's for hiding, when bad people come." I froze. My chest tightened until I thought I might not be able to breathe. The old servant's basement, sealed off decades ago, had only been mentioned once in the property report when we purchased the house. I had never spoken of it to Sophie, not once, yet she knew, and she was so certain. Dreams or warnings, the line between them blurred more each day, dissolving into something dangerously thin. By Friday evening, the weight of dread pressed down on me until I could hardly move. Daniel kissed Sophie on the forehead before leaving with his suitcase, insisting his business trip couldn't wait. His lips brushed her hair with all the tenderness of a devoted father, but my stomach knotted tighter with every word. He smiled at me as he left, but behind that smile, I saw something cold flicker in his eyes. I nodded, because I didn't trust myself to speak. The moment the door shut behind him, I felt as though the house exhaled, empty, yet suffocating. I found myself pacing through each room afterward, my fingertips grazing the backs of chairs, the edges of tables, the cool glass of framed photographs. I opened and closed doors, almost frantically, as though reassuring myself that this home was still mine, still real, still safe. But nothing reassured me. Instead, the air grew heavier, the silence louder. Later, while Sophie colored at the coffee table, I caught sight of movement outside. My body stiffened. A man in a dark coat was walking slowly along the edge of the property, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He paused near the garage, then drifted toward the backyard with the unsettling calm of someone who knew he wouldn't be confronted. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Panic burned through me. I rushed to close the curtains, my hands shaking as I pulled Sophie close. "We'll stay inside tonight," I told her, forcing a smile onto my face. She nodded, but I could feel her small body tense against me. The unease spread like cold water through my veins, chilling me from the inside. When I tucked her into bed later, Sophie clutched her stuffed rabbit, as though it were the only anchor she had left. Her eyes met mine with a pleading honesty. "Mommy," she whispered, "can I sleep in your room tonight?" For a moment, I hesitated, then gathered her close. "Of course, sweetheart." She clung to me, her little arms tightening, and just before sleep claimed her, she murmured words that made my blood run cold. Daddy and Grandma are planning something bad. I lay awake long after, staring into the dark, listening to the uneven rhythm of her breathing. Sleep eventually dragged me under, but it was restless and shallow, sometime past midnight. I stirred awake to a strange, acrid smell seeping through the cracks of the window. My throat prickled, my chest tightened. I sat up sharply, recognition flooding me in a single word that clawed through my mind. Heart pounding. I slipped from the bed and crept downstairs. I reached for the back door, but the handle refused to turn. Panic rose swiftly, choking me. I tried the side door, then the front. Each one was locked tight, not from within, but from the outside. And then I heard it, a mechanical hum, my blood, iced. Metal shutters descended over the windows, with a chilling finality, sealing the house in silence. A moment later, smoke began to curl beneath the kitchen door, sinister and thick. The faint crackle of fire followed, growing louder by the second. "Mommy," Sophie's voice trembled from the top of the stairs. She clutched her rabbit, eyes wide with terror. "We need to escape, right now." My chest constricted with panic. "What do you mean? Where can we go?" She didn't hesitate. Her small voice quivered, but there was conviction in it. "Behind the pantry," Grandma told me in a dream. The smell of smoke thickened. The heat began to press against the walls. I grabbed Sophie's hand and ran for the pantry. At first glance, it was only shelves lined with dusty jars and canned goods. But Sophie, quick and sure, pushed aside the lower shelf and pointed. "Here." I knelt and found a wooden panel hidden against the baseboard. I pulled hard, it groaned, then creaked open, revealing darkness. My pulse hammered. "Go, sweetheart," I urged. She crawled inside, clutching her rabbit, and I followed, forcing the panel shut behind us. The passage smelled of earth and dust, cobwebs clinging to our skin as we crawled. Smoke seeped faintly through the cracks, reminding me how thin the barrier between us and death really was. My heart pounded in my ears as we moved forward on our hands and knees. "Where does this lead?" I whispered. "To the garden shed," Sophie said, with unnerving calm. Grandma showed me. I whispered prayers beneath my breath as we crawled toward the faint sliver of light ahead. Behind us, a heavy thud rattled the walls, followed by the roar of fire consuming wood. Heat chased us forward, urging us with its blistering breath. Sophie never looked back. She moved forward with a determination that terrified me. Her small figure illuminated by the faint glow of light. Finally, we reached a rusted door. With all the strength I had left, I shoved it open, and fresh air burst in like salvation. I lifted Sophie and stumbled into the night, coughing and gasping. Behind us, the house that once held our lives, was already engulfed in flames. Black smoke clawed at the sky while fire painted the neighborhood in a sinister red. Sirens wailed in the distance, but they felt impossibly far. "Mommy," Sophie whispered, tugging at my sleeve, "let's go to Miss Barbara's." I clutched her tight, tears stinging my eyes. "You saved us," I whispered back. Her gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. Grandma was watching. She knew Daddy's plan. I trembled at her words, but I didn't argue. I carried her across the lawn, running toward Barbara's porch. When our neighbor opened the door, she found us standing there covered in soot, pale and shaking, Sophie's rabbit pressed tight between us. "Please," I gasped, nearly collapsing. "Call the police. Daniel set the house on fire. He tried to kill us." Barbara didn't question. She reached for the phone, her face pale with horror. Behind us, flames devoured what had once been my sanctuary. By the time firefighters arrived, the Miller house was gone, collapsing in on itself with groans of defeat, as flames roared through its frame. Neighbors gathered, whispering in disbelief, but their shock didn't matter. Only Sophie's trembling body in my arms mattered. When the police arrived, I repeated my story, voice shaking but firm. "This was no accident. My husband planned this. He wanted us dead." Lieutenant Harris, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, crouched in front of me. "Ma'am, that's a very serious accusation. Do you have any evidence?" With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone. I had taken photos the night I discovered the insurance documents, proof of the policy Daniel had taken in my name, making him the sole beneficiary. Harris studied the images, his expression tightening. "This raises questions," he admitted. "But it may not be enough." And then Sophie spoke. She tugged on my sleeve, her small voice clear and unwavering, despite the soot streaking her face. "Daddy said if Mommy was gone, everything would be his. He told Grandma Evelyn. He said it should look like an accident." The officers froze. Harris leaned closer. "When did you hear that, sweetheart?" "3 days ago," Sophie said calmly. "Outside Daddy's study, he was looking at house plans. He said the security system was ready. Hours later, investigators confirmed it. Gasoline residue marked deliberate points around the property. The security system had been tampered with, rigged so the windows and doors could be locked from the outside. What had begun as a frantic wife's desperate claim was now unraveling into a credible, damning case of attempted murder. Detectives began searching for Daniel. His business trip was nothing but smoke. And now, with the fire that was meant to erase me, his lies had begun to burn instead. The revelations came crashing down like waves against a cliff, relentless and unyielding. I remember sitting there, in that suffocating courtroom in Portland, staring at Daniel as though he were a stranger draped in my husband's skin. My hands trembled as I folded them together on my lap, knuckles white, nails biting into my palms. Sophie sat close to me, her small legs swinging nervously off the wooden bench. Her fingers curled into the sleeve of my sweater, as if she knew I might fall apart if she let go. Her chin was lifted high, though brave in the way only a child can be when they don't fully understand the storm swirling around them. The room buzzed like a hive. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching paper, cameras flashing in quiet intervals like sparks of lightning. Neighbors from our street, those who once waved with polite smiles at the sight of Daniel polishing his car, or Evelyn tending roses, now sat forward, hungry-eyed, whispering disbelief into their cupped hands. The air was thick with curiosity, judgment, and a sick fascination. Everyone wanted to know how the Miller family, once a glossy portrait of respectability, had fractured into something so monstrous. The prosecutor stood tall, methodical, and precise. He laid out the evidence with the kind of calm ruthlessness that left no room for doubt. First came the photographs, charred images of the place that had been my sanctuary, my home, displayed on a cold projector screen for the world to gawk at. The kitchen counter where I once poured Sophie's orange juice, blackened and cracked. The staircase that carried the laughter of childhood games, reduced to ash and soot. The evidence felt like salt rubbed into wounds that had barely begun to close. But it was necessary. Every frame, every detail, was proof of the betrayal I had sensed, but never wanted to name. Then came the reports, the tampered security system, the locks rewired so that escape would have been impossible. The chemical analysis confirming gasoline had been poured in deliberate patterns, trails of fire waiting to bloom. Gasoline had soaked into the very walls where Sophie once drew pictures of clouds and animals with crayons. My stomach twisted at the thought of her innocence being marked for destruction by the people who should have cherished her most. Phone records followed, page after page projected onto the screen, numbers connecting Daniel and Evelyn in an endless chain of whispered conspiracy. Calls at midnight, at dawn, while I was asleep just a few feet away. While I dreamed, they plotted. While I tried to heal from grief, they sharpened knives in the dark. The prosecutor's voice was steady, almost clinical, as he spoke. The defendant, Daniel Miller, intended to murder his wife and daughter in order to seize her inheritance. This was not a crime of passion. This was calculated, deliberate, cold. Each word pierced me, not because I didn't know, but because hearing it spoken aloud, branded into the official record of our lives, made it impossible to bury. Sophie squeezed my arm tighter, her small voice whispering, "Mommy, it's okay. We're safe now. Safe." The word echoed in my head, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Safety felt like a distant memory, something fragile that had shattered the moment Daniel looked at me not as his wife, but as an obstacle. Daniel's defense attorney rose next, a man too slick for his own good. With a voice dripping in false sympathy, he tried to twist the narrative, painting Daniel as a victim of circumstance, a man who had buckled under financial pressure and crumbled under the weight of expectations. His mental state had deteriorated, the attorney argued. He wasn't thinking clearly, he wasn't in control of his actions, but I knew better. I had seen the clarity in Daniel's eyes during those late nights, when he thought I wasn't watching. His careful planning, the way he compartmentalized his lies, the way he charmed neighbors in the morning, and whispered secrets to Evelyn at night. It wasn't madness, it was choice, it was greed, sharpened into something cruel and deadly. As the arguments volleyed back and forth, I sat rooted in silence, my heart pounding with a strange mix of grief and fury. My husband, the man who once kissed my forehead goodnight, was nothing but a mask, and behind it something hollow, something merciless. And Evelyn, sitting across the room in her pearl necklace and tailored dress, tried to keep her composure, though her eyes darted like a cornered animal's. For years she had looked down on me, judging my every move, waiting for me to stumble, so she could remind me I wasn't enough. Now her ambition had turned into rot, and the stench of it filled the courtroom. I thought of my mother then, of the inheritance she left me, not as money, but as trust, as love from beyond the grave. How Evelyn and Daniel had tried to twist that gift into blood money, as though family was something disposable, something to be sacrificed at the altar of ambition. The thought made my stomach churn, but it also steeled me. Revenge wasn't about anger anymore, it was about survival, about reclaiming what was stolen, about ensuring Sophie grew up, knowing the truth. And so I sat there, my hand gently stroking my daughter's hair, as if to soothe her, but really to remind myself, we were still here. They had tried to erase us, to burn our story into nothing but ashes, but the fire had failed, we had survived, and now they would have to face what they had created in the light of day, with no shadows left to hide in. Daniel's last card was desperation. I sat frozen as he leaned forward in the witness stand, voice dripping with practiced outrage. "She manipulated me," he declared, jabbing his finger toward Evelyn with the kind of arrogance only a cornered man could muster. "Evelyn Miller has always controlled my life. This was her plan, not mine." His words sliced through the air like a blade. The courtroom rippled with uneasy whispers, reporters scratching frantically at their notepads, neighbors gasping as though they'd been slapped. But then, Evelyn stood. Slowly at first, like a queen defending her crumbling throne, and then with a venom that silenced the room. Her pearls trembled against her throat as her voice cracked, not with sorrow but with rage. "Do not dare put this on me, Daniel," she spat, each syllable laced with betrayal. "I did everything for you. I sacrificed my life for you. I carried out your wishes because I thought you deserved better than her." Her hand shot toward me, trembling yet accusatory, as though I were the source of all her misfortune. For a moment, the courtroom went utterly still. Even her own attorney paled, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Evelyn had just unraveled years of careful image building in one unguarded outburst, and in doing so she had bound herself to Daniel in guilt. No defense, no excuses, just the naked truth of ambition warped by love into something poisonous. But nothing prepared me for what came next. When the bailiff called Sophie's name, my heart nearly stopped. My little girl, only 6 years old, clutching her stuffed rabbit with one hand and smoothing her dress nervously with the other, walked down the long aisle toward the witness stand. She looked so small against the towering walls of justice, so fragile under the heavy stares of strangers, yet she moved with a kind of quiet courage I will never forget. The bailiff leaned down gently, swore her in with a voice softer than I'd ever heard inside that courtroom. And then Sophie spoke, Her voice was delicate, steady, carrying the weight of truth no adult could twist. She told them what she had overheard, how her father whispered to Evelyn late at night, words she never should have had to repeat. "If Caroline is gone, everything will be mine. We just need to make it look like an accident." My breath caught in my throat, my chest aching as if I'd been struck. She spoke of the old house plans Daniel had studied, of the hidden passage she had stumbled upon, how my late mother, her grandmother, had guided her in a dream to discover what Daniel had tried to keep buried. I watched as jurors leaned closer, their faces softened, caught between skepticism and the undeniable purity of a child's testimony. The prosecutor asked gently, "Sophie, when you say grandma, which one do you mean?" Sophie's little hand pointed toward me, her gaze unwavering. "Mommy's mommy," she said with certainty. "She told me to warn Mommy. She told me Daddy had a bad plan." The murmur that swept through the courtroom was electric. It wasn't evidence in the strictest sense, but it carried something stronger, a child's unfiltered truth, fearless, impossible to dismiss. My vision blurred with tears as Sophie stepped down, still clutching her rabbit, her eyes searching for me. When she found me, I opened my arms, and she nestled into my lap, as though the entire trial had been just another storm she had weathered by my side. In that moment I knew her courage had accomplished more than any photograph or report could. She had spoken light into the darkness, shattering the lies that bound us. The verdict came swiftly after that. The jury's faces were grave, but there was no hesitation. "Guilty, both Daniel and Evelyn." The words landed with finality, echoing like the toll of a bell. Daniel was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and arson, his carefully crafted image dismantled in the span of a few days. Evelyn, stripped of her elegance and her manipulative charm, received 8 years for conspiracy. Justice, bitter, painful, imperfect, yet undeniable. 6 months later, the world looked different. The Grand Miller estate was gone, a smoldering ruin erased from the horizon of my life. Instead, autumn leaves now drifted across the yard of a small cottage on the edge of Portland. Our new home was modest, with paint still peeling on the shutters and a garden that needed tending, but to Sophie and me, it was a sanctuary. In the evenings, warm light spilled from its windows, and the air often carried the scent of apple pie cooling on the counter. Safety lingered here, in the creak of the floorboards, in the simple routine of quiet breakfasts and laughter that no longer carried a hidden edge. Grandeur had never mattered, only peace. I had returned to my work at the museum, cautious at first, but gradually regaining my rhythm. The exhibition that once consumed me had blossomed into something greater. I had founded a project of my own, a foundation for young female artists, giving voice to those who had been overlooked for far too long. I named it the Second Light Foundation, a promise to myself and to Sophie that life, no matter how scarred, could always offer another chance to shine. Part of my inheritance funded it, money that Daniel and Evelyn once tried to claim through fire and blood. Now, instead of greed, it had become a vessel of hope. When I explained the name to Sophie one evening, she nodded proudly, her eyes shining. "It means we can start again," she said, her voice filled with wisdom far beyond her years. Sophie, too, had begun to heal. With the help of Dr. Michael Hayes, a gentle man with kind eyes and endless patience, she learned how to speak her fears instead of burying them. Slowly the nightmares loosened their grip. She laughed more, made friends at school, filled her sketchbooks with bright drawings that spilled over with joy. One of her pictures, chosen for a student art exhibition, showed 3 figures, herself, me, and my mother. I framed it and hung it in the hallway, a reminder that love transcends even death, that my mother's spirit still guarded us. One evening, as the horizon hinted at snow, Michael joined us for dinner. He had become more than a counselor in our lives. His presence was steady, reassuring, the kind of kindness that didn't demand or intrude, but simply existed, waiting. He spoke gently with Sophie about her drawings, praised her courage, and when our eyes met across the table, I felt something stir within me. I had thought forever buried, not love, not yet, but the fragile, cautious beginning of trust. And for the first time in a long time, as laughter drifted through the little cottage, I believed in the possibility of tomorrow. After the meal, Sophie leaned gently against my arm, her little body warm against mine, her eyes, wide and thoughtful, lifted to me with a question that seemed to weigh more than her years. "Mommy, what is a real family?" I froze for a moment, the words catching in my throat. 100 images flashed through my mind. Daniel's cold gaze across the dinner table, Evelyn's calculating smile, the house that had burned behind us, the nights when trust had felt like a weapon used against me. But then my thoughts shifted to Sophie's laughter, to my mother's guiding whispers, to Michael's quiet presence at the table tonight. I breathed slowly, letting the answer form with honesty rather than haste. "A real family," I told her softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "is not about blood alone. It is about people who care for each other, who protect one another, and who want each other to be free. Family is built with love, not just with names." Sophie's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. She tilted her head, her gaze sliding toward Michael, who sat quietly, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite name. Then, with the pure bluntness only a child could wield, she added, "Then maybe he is family too." A laugh, soft, surprised, and genuine, escaped my lips. Michael chuckled as well, his eyes warm, not pressing for more, but letting the moment stand on its own. Sophie giggled, proud of herself, and for the first time in years, the sound of laughter in my home carried no shadow, no weight of hidden malice. It was just laughter, blending with the soft crackle of the fireplace, stitching a fragile thread of hope into the fabric of our lives. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to feel it, the warmth of a true beginning. Christmas Eve arrived, wrapped in snow. The flakes fell slowly, silently, covering the quiet street outside in a blanket of white. Inside the cottage, the fire burned steadily, painting the walls with a golden glow. Sophie and I sat together on the rug before it, the flames flickering in her eyes. She leaned into my shoulder, still holding the same stuffed rabbit that had traveled with her through fire and smoke, through tunnels of earth and nights of fear. Its fur was singed in places, but like us, it had survived. I kissed the top of her head, tasting salt as my tears mixed with the faint scent of her hair. "Your courage saved us, Sophie," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You gave us a new life." She tilted her head up, her small voice soft but unwavering. "We saved each other, Mommy. And Grandma helped too." Her words pierced me deeper than any blade ever could, but not with pain, with the overwhelming weight of love. I smiled, though my eyes glistened with tears. Perhaps my mother's spirit had lingered, guiding us through the smoke and terror, whispering truths into Sophie's dreams. Perhaps it had been nothing more than memory, clung to so tightly it felt alive. Either way, I believed it now. Her love had carried us when I had nearly lost all strength. The fire snapped and crackled, echoing softly in the room as I let my thoughts wander. I had learned hard lessons. Trust, I now knew, is not blind. It cannot be given freely to those who wear convincing masks. Family, I understood, is not defined by blood or law, but by loyalty, by kindness, by the hands that pull you back when you're falling. It is in a daughter's unshakable courage, in a neighbor's open door, in the quiet constancy of a man who stands by without asking for anything in return. True family is in those who heal rather than harm, who shield you instead of betraying you. It is the thread that binds us in our most fragile moments and carries us into the light. To you listening now, let me leave you with this: hold close those who love you honestly, and guard that love fiercely. Do not dismiss the quiet instincts that whisper when something feels wrong. Those instincts are your inheritance, the wisdom carved by survival, the voice that may one day save your life. If my story touched your heart, I ask you to share it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that betrayal does not end the story, that survival is not weakness, but strength, that a second beginning is always possible. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I will read them all. And if you believe in stories like mine, stories of resilience, betrayal, and the power of rising again, subscribe to The Art of Revenge. Your support gives voice to those who have been silenced, and it reminds us all that even in the deepest darkness, there can be a second light.